Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tech Classes, and I'm making a Informatica interview preparation videos in this series, and this is going to be my first video. This is Karthik here, and I'm going to share my screen and walk you through the Informatica interview questions which I have got, and I assume that this may be helpful for you. So I'm going to walk you through about 35 questions here in this video, and we will try to understand, how do you need to answer when you're part of an interview. This covers in length about your recent project and some of the Informatica questions and some of the SQL questions which you have. So all of them, we go through that one by one. Okay. So first question is more about, when you get started with a interview, people do ask you about, what did you do in your recent project? This probably the answer which may vary according to your resume, but I'm going to take up an example of a health insurance client, which can actually, a health insurance customer, what kind of transactional system they have and how do you basically right. So how do you basically explain about a health insurance project, all of that? So I'm going to take up that and help you to understand it. Okay, let's talk about, the sample health insurance company. See, in general, health insurance companies actually provide health plans to the providers. I mean, basically to members, wherein health insurance companies will maintain a different type of an applications. So I mean, some of you may have heard about claim adjudication systems, which are actually used for claim related information. Let's talk about basically the facets. The facets is an application which is generally used for claim processing. So that's a transactional system which basically is used by the multiple health insurance provider. I mean, you can take an example of Cigna or BCBS or maybe the WellPoint, or probably about Emblem Health. So these are all basically the health insurance providers who provide health insurance to the different members. They provide to employers, individual members, community and state population, everything. So Facets is a claim application where all your claim data will actually be stored in a Facets application. I mean, this is nothing but a transactional application. Just assume that you're actually working in a health insurance project. Okay, so Facets is one application where you have all the claim adjudication happens. Similarly, these health insurance companies will also be capturing or probably using the other type of applications, maybe for storing their policy information, or probably the health plan related information. All of that probably is stored in another transactional system. I mean, probably I'm not naming it for now, but you can just think about a system or an enterprise application which stores about all your healthcare plans and policies, etc. Right? And then probably you can think of they also use some of the marketing applications or probably the sales applications like a Salesforce CRM. Maybe their sales teams are probably using the sales applications. You can call it as they're using a Salesforce CRM. So this is another transactional application. What you have, all of these are basically a transactional system in an organization. To run their day-to-day operations, they are actually using these applications. So, and assume that like you are actually working in a health insurance company and you're part of a data warehousing project where all your transactional data is integrated for different reporting purposes. And in this project, like basically you have built about different data marts, maybe, right? So one is for claims related subject area. You have created you have built one claims data mart. And maybe for all the sales related and service related information, you probably have another data mart which stores all your sales data, finance data, and all of these, right? So you have another data mart. For a simple explanation, I'm actually taking approach of I would call it as a bottom-up approach from a Kimball. Maybe it's an old approach, probably in a cloud era. But basically, you just assume that you're actually building a two different data marts. So when you have to explain about your project, whenever you get started, you need to explain about the complete data flow, how the data is actually integrated from your transactional system all the way to data mart. So that is something that which you need to emphasize, in your project. So, okay, so let me take the same example. So if I have to explain, suppose, let's say if I'm part of this interview, how I'm going to do it is that as an Informatica developer, whatever the responsibilities that you have actually implemented as part of it, so that is what you need to explain. So when you're talking about this most recent project, so what I would say is, as an Informatica developer, see, since you are working as an Informatica developer, you need to emphasize on, okay, as an Informatica developer, I have involved in integrating the data from a different transactional systems, right? So when I say different transactional systems in this scenario, I mean, assets is one transactional system, and similarly the provider information or a policy information, sales information, all of that. Right? I've involved in integrating the data from a different transactional system, initially into the staging area, where you have got all the incremental data, and then from a staging area you basically have loaded the data into a different data mart, right? So that is a data flow which you can establish. So as part of this, basically, you could say that maybe a OBIEE or a Tableau or a Cognos is used as a reporting tool for generating of a report. And nowadays, the Power BI is also a very popular tool from Microsoft. You can even talk about Power BI is used as a reporting tool. So once you give the brief about it, so it is always good to emphasize on what is the technology that is involved and where is your data warehouse is actually built on this project. You could say that, depending upon the project you are into, you can say that, we have a data warehouse which is created in Oracle database, or you can say that it is even part of a Sybase, or you can say that, our data warehouse is actually built on Teradata. So it changes from a project to project. So you can talk about what is a data warehousing. Obviously, then the next step is your ETL tool. What ETL tool you have used? Since Informatica Power Center is an ETL tool, right away you can say that Informatica Power Center is used as an ETL tool, and the BI tool is either OBIE or a Tableau. That's what you can talk about the technology. So once you give the purpose of the project, so then you can probably talk about your responsibilities. So as an Informatica developer, generally all your duty is to integrate the data and make the data available for your reporting purpose, right? So as an Informatica developer, first you understand the requirements from your business stakeholders in terms of what data has to be integrated, all of that. Once you understand what data has to be integrated, as a developer, what you do is you create a data model. Generally the data model is actually created by the senior tech leads, or maybe sometimes specific data modelers will be there as part of a project. So they create the data model, and namely the data model is more about the dimension model, be it is a star or a snowflake, which will be created as part of your data warehouse, so as you may know, right? So once the data model is created, then you basically create a source to target mapping sheet. That is the first responsibility which happens in the low level design. So you talk about STM, or some people call it as a source to target mapping sheet, a data mapping sheet, or a data specification sheet. All of them are same. You prepare that data mapping sheet, basically, which contains the source, target, and the set of transformations that you're applying within your ETL job, right? So all those transformation details and everything is going to be a part of a STM document. So once that STM document is going to be the base for you to get started with your development, basically, right? So once the STM is created, then you basically get started with the development. So as an Informatica developer, what do you build or what do you develop? So you basically first start with importing of sources, like what are the different sources from which you are reading a data. Then you will basically import the targets. I mean, I'm assuming that you have got the Informatica access by this time, right? So that is something that which we're not covering in the video, but just assume that you have already the Informatica access. So you get started with importing of the sources, importing of the target. and then you start building the mappings. So when you're building a mapping, right, so it is basically mapping will contain always the source, target, and the transformation. So that details are already available within your STM or a data mapping sheet. And once you import it, the next step is about build the mappings with a set of transformations. Again, you can emphasize always like what type of transformations you have used. Maybe a source qualifier transformation, filter transformation, aggregator transformation, sorter transformation, maybe a joiner transformation if you have used. All these in general, you can apply the different transformations which you use. And in case if you're familiar with XML transformation, you can say that you have used a XML transformation. All of these you apply depending upon the transformation logic in your map in your basically the project, and then you build those mappings. So once you build a mapping, you can't run a mapping. Obviously, you need to build the session. So you're going to build all those sessions and everything as part of a workflow manager, as you know, right? So you build the sessions and you build the workflows. Once sessions and workflows are built, then you need to basically validate whatever the jobs that you have built or whatever the workflows that you have built, whether it is properly integrating a data or not. As a developer, you're going to do the unit testing, right? You test them and ensure that your session is properly integrating a data into a target. You create a unit test scripts, and again, unit test scripts will cover basically about count validation, maybe the duplicate record validation on the target. All of these basically you do it after the as part of unit testing. So once you do that, like basically unit testing is done, then you need to migrate that basically the testing phase starts and you need to migrate all the components. So you can say that worked with uh, worked with Informatica admins and database admins to migrate the stuff, right? So you work with database admins to create all your tables, whatever is created by the data modeler. And then you work with Informatica admin to migrate all your mapping sessions and workflows. And once the testing starts, it's basically that you coordinate with your ETL testers or BI testers. And I mean, that is going to be a next responsibility, right? So coordinate with the ETL testing team, and in replicating the issues whatever they have raised, and then fixing them, and then again migrating it, right? Once a testing is done, then you work with your Informatica admin, again the database admin, and then migrate all your ETL jobs, basically migrate ETL jobs to your production environment. Production environment is going to be a live environment where continuously the data gets integrated and your business users will start using the data. So basically you migrate all the jobs and then you schedule them, right? So if you want to emphasize more about the scheduling of it, if you have used Informatica scheduler in your project, you can always say, okay, I have used Informatica scheduler and we scheduled all the jobs within the Informatica. As you know, right, so Informatica scheduler means like you basically schedule all your jobs in the workflow manager, and based on the system time, it will start triggering it. So in case if you have used Autosys, you can emphasize on Autosys, like all our ETL jobs are scheduled in Autosys, and Autosys actually uses the PMCMD command for a triggering of your ETL jobs. So this is how you need to explain about your general project. So which should cover about complete your responsibilities and what technology you have used, what is the general purpose of your project, all of that. So this is basically something that which you need to cover whenever somebody asks about your recent project. So this is about your question number one, which took a long time, and remaining things we run through it very quickly. Okay, so this is something we're done with one. I'm moving on to the second one. Okay, suppose let's say if the interviewer asks you what is the size of your data warehouse, and basically, I mean, whatever the data warehouse that you have built, what is the size of the data warehouse? Generally, they ask you to understand I mean, your experience, right? So basically, if you're actually working in a health insurance company, your volume of data is going to be very high, right? So the claims what health insurance provider get, or maybe the kind of plans, different type of data that they interact with the different external providers. So data size will be very huge. So probably, if you're actually storing a 3 to 5 years of data, let's say for example. So this will be somewhere around 500 gigabytes to 1 terabyte of data, even if you store it for probably 5 years of data, and your daily volume is going to be definitely more than 10 million. I mean, if you talk about the claims table and all of that, there will be a continuous claims which you receive from a different providers in a health insurance. So you can definitely say that, the claim fact table contains more than 10 million on a weekly basis, right? So generally the size of the data warehouse will vary between 500 gigabytes to 1 terabyte. I'm talking about now the databases or a data warehouses which are built in Oracle, Teradata, and all of this stuff. I mean, we're not talking really about the cloud. We cover those cloud questions probably later point of time, right? So this is your data warehouse size. Yeah. So I'm moving on to the third question. So what is a bottleneck that you actually see in a query? When a query is running slow, how are you going to find the issue? I mean, this is basically a common problem that you get to see whenever you are dealing with the large volume of data, or whenever the query is basically a bad written. How basically you find it. Okay. See, basically there is a complex query. I mean, if you have to do it, it's a kind of a step-by-step approach. And it's a kind of a trial and error method approach, which basically you need to follow to understand the issue within a query. But an interview perspective, you need to go by answering them in a very specific process. Okay, suppose let's say if somebody has given you a very complex query and ask you to understand what is a challenge or issue with this query, what basically if someone asks me, what I do is I go and first execute it, or probably take a look at the query. How many number of tables are there? What is a driving table? And basically whether this query is using the indexes or not, or whether it is going for a full table scan. So all these metrics that you need to study to understand whether the query is doing good or not. So basically to do that, whether the query is using a full table scan or an index scan, this one you need to find the cost of the query. So you can go to the SQL developer, but I don't have SQL developer here. You can go to the SQL developer and run a query plan. So first step, in order to understand the performance of the query, you need to run the query plan. So when you run the query plan, it will give you the cost of the query. I mean, how much time, how much memory it is using, how much time it is using, all of that. It will give you the cost of the query. Once you have the cost of the query, you can understand whether it is using a full table scan, or basically it is using any of the indexes which are there. See, if you're actually reading 5% of the data from a table, then it is recommended to go for an index scan. If you're actually reading an entire table, then it's recommended to go for a full table scan. So you need to check what is the volume of data that you're actually retrieving it using that query. Most of the time, the index scan is better. So you need to check whether the indexes that are there on the table is really being useful. All of that need to be verified with respect to the index scan. So basically, first you need to find the cost of the query, check whether the indexes are being used. If the indexes are not used, why it is not being used. All of that, a step-by-step process you need to do, and keep, check the driving table, basically what table is actually used. So always the driving table should be the one which which has the low volume of data. That should be your driving table. And basically, in Oracle and all, you can probably make use of the hints and see Oracle hints and see, if the query is really resulting you in a better way. So hint actually helps you to break your query into multiple ways, and then execute that query. So this is basically the general approach that people do ask you in interviews. So you have to lay down the process that you do. I mean, you may not be really solving the problem in the interview, but you need to know what is the purpose and how are you going to do that, right? So that is the third question. So let me move on quickly on to next one. Most of the time, you may get to ask the basic questions as well. Something like, what is difference between a Agile and Waterfall, right? See, all the projects, whatever is executed now in this today's world is more on Agile. Agile has basically two type of frameworks which they use. One is a Scrum and Kanban. Most of the projects use a Scrum process, and very less projects use a Kanban. Waterfall is a pretty old method, and probably always you can say that you're using Agile Scrum as part of your project. So basically, in Agile Scrum, what will happen? Your project will be broken into multiple iterations, which it is called as a sprint. Each sprint will consist of maybe a 2 weeks of time frame, and there will be a specific user stories which will be assigned to you. and you need to work on those user stories within those 10 days of time, 10 working days of time. So, and there will be a different roles within the project, like Scrum Master, a developer, tester, business analyst, or a data analyst, and then the technical architect, or maybe a data modeler. So all together, everybody will be a part of this Scrum process, and then you'll also be part of that project, and then you go through that entire story. So Waterfall is more like it's an old school process. I mean, old traditional method, basically, where first you capture all the requirements, then you start with the design. Once you complete with the design, then you basically go for a development and all of that. So Waterfall typically takes about 3 to 6 months of time, and basically the users will not be able to experience the end product till the 6 months. I mean, if at all the requirements are changing within the 6 months, again you need to revisit it, right? So that's why most of the cases, the people go for Agile, because you get to understand what is the progress you're making, what are the challenges that you are basically facing, and your end user will be able to measure the progress that you're making, and they'll be able to experience the product as well. That's why most of the times you go for an Agile, right? So that is basically about your fourth question. So fifth one, let's move on. Have you ever been to support role or a production, or you worked completely on development? See, in general, when you talk about an SDLC lifecycle, SDLC lifecycle works in this way, right? So first, you capture the requirements, and then you do a design. As I said, like from design, you go to a build. Once the build is done, you do the test the product, and once the testing is done, you put that into a production environment. Once it is into the production environment, your jobs may be running every day. If the job fails, who is going to take care of it? That's going to be handled by the Informatica support guy, who is working as part of your project. So that's why if you are working in an enhancement project or a support project, there will be a different set of tools which will be used. Maybe something like a LAN desk, or maybe a service now. These are all the different tools basically used. I mean, whenever a business user faces the issue, they create an incident or a ticket, which you call, and that has to be addressed by the Informatica support guy. So if you are part of a support role, you basically have to say that, yeah, I was part of a enhancement project. Whenever we are completing the development, we deploy it into a production environment, and we provide a warranty support for 3 weeks time, and then it will be moved on to a ops team. But if you're part of an ops team, then you can actually say that ops team is nothing but in your data operations team, right? So if you're part of a data operations team, your responsibilities are going to be like this. Whenever a business user see an issue in a report, or probably the job is failed, automatically the ticket will be created, or you may have to create a ticket and then troubleshoot that issue. What is the issue is all about, and basically go and check the session log and see what is the error, and check that error. If it is probably related to a network issue, you may have to interact with your network admin or a database admin. So these are the general issues that you face. Maybe you can, if you're actually applying for a Informatica support role, you can always emphasize on what kind of issues that you have seen, right? So sometimes if your database goes down, Informatica cannot connect to a database, and then you definitely get all your jobs will get failed because your database is down. It cannot read the data, it cannot write the data. All these are network issues, and everything will come. And most of the time, you get to see the unique constraint violation errors, or maybe because of the data mismatch issues. All of these are the general issues that you see in a Informatica. So if you're part of a support role, you need to explain about what tools you have used and how you get the ticket, how you solve the ticket, how you monitor the jobs. Basically, if it is an autosys, you monitor the job. Whenever a job is failed, you create a ticket and solve it, right? So that is basically a support role which happens within this, right? Okay, so next question is like, what exactly did you develop and what challenges you faced it? So half of the answer is actually covered as part of our first question, but yeah, you can always say that I've developed the mapping sessions, workflows, and then using a different set of transformations, and then unit tested the components, all of that, like you can probably say from a previous question. So difference between an aggregator and a router, right? So aggregator is basically just works like a group by clause. And whenever you want to compute the aggregated values like sum, total, count, all of these, like you can, it just exactly work like a group by clause in your SQL. And router basically divides the data into different groups, right? So router divides the data into different groups. Aggregator basically aggregates the data, right? So that works like a group by clause. How big is your data warehouse and how many tables and rows are there? So data warehouse size, I did explain in my previous question. And then basically how many number of tables. See, it all depends upon the subject area by subject area. So since I've taken an example of health insurance here, you could say that, claim subject area, we had about some probably 7 to 8 fact tables and 15 dimensions, and claim table was close to, yeah, probably you can say that more than 500 million records. You may not be able to, I mean, so definitely the large volume of data, 500 million records, and the other dimension tables are of close to 1 to 2 million records, probably like a member or provider, all these, right? So you can say that 1 million to 2 million dimension, I mean, rows in the dimension tables, and the fact tables, it's close to 500 million. Definitely the claims table will be very large, and you can say that. So what kind of Unix scripts you may have created in your project? So generally in a as a ETL developer, right? So whenever you're reading a data from a files, generally what we do is we read the data from a file and we archive it, right? So for archiving, you have to create a script. So you could say that, okay, there was an existing script, in a existing script in our project for archiving the files, and I have used that Unix script and archive the files. And maybe if you're good at Unix, you can even say that, I have created a Unix script for archiving the files as well, right? So one is for archiving the files, and maybe you can even say for maybe deleting the files which are older than probably 30 days. I mean, there is no point in keeping the archived files for a longer time. So you can always, I mean, generally we create a script to delete the files which are older than 30 days, because within 30 days, if you're not getting any issue with respect to that, you can always delete them, right? So deleting the 30 days. And then you can also talk about basically I have created a Unix script for creating a file list for a indirect method, right? So indirect method, hope like there is a direct and indirect method when you're reading files, right? So indirect method is actually used for reading a multiple files of the same structure in Informatica, right? So if you want to use that, you can probably create a file list by using a script, right? So those are all the different things. Next question is more about what do you know about cloud technology? See, nowadays, Informatica is being used as an on-premise tool so far, and nowadays you may be hearing about a lot of jobs on the Informatica cloud as well. Informatica cloud is actually a PaaS platform which helps you to transform your data. Whatever the functionality that you're doing in Informatica on-premise, you can do the same thing in Informatica cloud. I mean, most of the transformations, what you can do in the Informatica cloud, and this is actually referred as IICS, Informatica Intelligence Cloud Services. That is closer to your Informatica. But if you have to really stretch upon the other cloud providers, maybe somebody like a AWS or Microsoft Azure or a GCP, you can always emphasize on it, right? So all your on-premise data warehouses are modernized in AWS or Azure or GCP. You can just say that, I did hear about them, and probably you do not have much of the hands-on experience, right? Yeah, nowadays, your data warehouses. Okay, I'm moving on to the next question. So what do you know about Snowflake, right? So Snowflake is actually a cloud data warehouse which can be configured in the AWS environment or a Azure environment or a Google Cloud environment. It's specifically designed only for a data warehousing purpose. You cannot use Snowflake for a transactional purpose like your Oracle or SQL server, right? Snowflake is specifically designed to handle the efficient load and efficient reading. And it comes with a different type of an architecture. There is a concept of virtual warehouse in the Snowflake, wherein you can actually create a different set of warehouses. I mean, don't again compare this warehouse with your actual data warehouse. That is different and this is different. So within the Snowflake, you can create a different component. I mean, there is a component called as a virtual warehouse. You can create one virtual warehouse for loading the data and one virtual warehouse for reading the data. So you're basically, for each of the purpose, you can actually do different kind of warehouses can be configured, and Snowflake actually uses your underlying storage in the Azure. Maybe if it is Azure, it uses the blob. If it is AWS, basically it uses the S3 and all of that, right? So Snowflake is, you can always say Snowflake is a cloud data warehouse. You can always use the same SQL what you're using in SQL Server or a Teradata or probably the Oracle. Similar kind of a SQL queries, you can write it in a cloud data warehouse, and you can log in through a browser, you can execute all your queries, everything. I mean, you can configure a Snowflake with SSO, single sign-on, all these things can happen in the Snowflake. Snowflake is going to be a next big things for a data warehouse and modernization, and most of your data warehouses will be maybe migrated to Snowflake, right? So that is more on a Snowflake side of it. So I'm moving on to the next question. That is your slowly changing dimension. I mean, this is more like a basic question. I think most of you may be knowing. Slowly changing dimension is basically which captures the, I mean, it's a one type of a dimension. There are three types of slowly changing dimension which we use. Like one is a SCD type 1, SCD type 2, and SCD type 3. SCD type 1 always captures the most recent data, and SCD type 2 will capture the complete historical data with respect to that. And SCD type 3 will capture the complete, basically a partial history, right? So these are basic definitions you can always answer. How are you running your jobs like workflow? Okay, see, when you want to, basically, this is the question more touches upon your scheduling, right? In general, in ETL projects, so you can schedule all your ETL jobs, or that is nothing but a workflow in your Informatica workflow manager. So if you quickly want to see that, I can even demo that in my virtual environment. So what you can actually do is, right, so this is your workflow manager, right? So I can go here. If I want to schedule this workflow, okay, this is WODS underscore employee types. I go here, just click on scheduler. You can define two ways of scheduling, whether it is a reusable schedule or a non-reusable schedule. If you want to define a reusable scheduler, you can use this browser. Or if you want to define only the schedule only for this workflow, I can just go to the workflow, edit it, go to the scheduler tab, and this is your non-reusable scheduler. Let's say I want to schedule this workflow every weekday, 7 a.m. in the morning, right? So I go here, run continue, no. So scheduling options, you go here, customized repeat, click on edit. So I want to run this weekly, right? So I just go and select weekly. I want to run only Monday to Friday, right? So I just go and select what time you want to run this, right? Run only once in a day, or run for every probably every 2 hours, 3 hours. I mean, I just want to run only once in a day at 7 a.m. in the morning. So I just select it as a weekly. I just go and select 8 a.m. in the morning. So how long you want to keep this schedule as a valid? Forever means it will be forever within your Informatica server. I mean, it will be keep running. Or you want to end this probably by 1 year, maybe. You can just choose probably till July 23rd. I mean, I'm just selecting a random date. So you just apply, click on OK, apply. Now you define the schedule for this workflow and you can save it. Use Control S to save it. And I don't want this session, so probably I can just delete from my workflow. So just again, save it. Now I want to schedule this workflow, right? So this is, I can just right click on it, just say schedule workflow. Now this workflow is scheduled. I think it's scheduled to run at, if I remember correctly, I think I'm not sure like what date I have chosen here. Let me go back. Edit. Okay, so this is scheduled from 20 to 8 a.m., right? So this is probably from tomorrow. I think since we passed the time, um, tomorrow 8 a.m. it will trigger. So you can schedule the jobs within the Informatica scheduler, but Informatica scheduler comes with a different type of limitations. That's why most of the projects they use tools like Control M or AutoSys, maybe a DAC, data warehousing administration console, and yeah, maybe I have used even a WLM scheduler, Tidal. Different ETL jobs will be, I mean, ETL scheduling tools will be there. And all these tools uses the PMCMD command for triggering the workflow. PMCMD command, basically you need to pass the workflow name, folder name, integration service name, and the username and password. Once you pass it, your scheduling tool will trigger it on the Informatica server. Automatically, the workflow gets started. So you can always schedule only the workflow, not basically a session within the Informatica workflow manager. So that's pretty much. I think this is a long video. We can probably stop it for now and then continue the rest of the things in the next video. Thank you.